Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of SUGTalks. I'm Craig Dale, your host, and together with our special guests, we'll take a deep dive into the topics, challenges and opportunities facing SAP users today. Please make sure you subscribe so you never miss another episode. I'm delighted to be joined today by Andrew Morris, Applications and Cybersecurity Architect at Turnkey Consulting, Brian Froom, Information Security Manager at TATS Steel and also Chair of the UKISUG Audit Control and Security Special Interest Group, and Paul Lloyd-Smith, Team Lead at SAP UK&I Domain Advisory Group. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing cybersecurity and the world of SAP. However, to start things off, we always ask an icebreaker question, and given the seriousness of cybersecurity for many businesses, thought we'd go down a different way with the opening question. So, gentlemen, would you rather be able to talk to animals or speak every human language? And I'll begin, and I think I'd talk to animals actually. It'll be interesting when I go on my walk on a morning that, all of the animals I encounter, birds, rabbits and plenty of dogs, be interesting to converse with them, but also think, what are they thinking or saying about me? Like, birds tweeting that, what's this idiot doing walking in the rain? Why is he at home and he's got a roof over his head? Anyway, that's my answer. But Andrew?
I would also be talk to animals, mainly so I can tell my cat not to claw at my furniture.
Yeah, that would be a good one, because they don't seem to understand it when you say it in English to them.
No, exactly.
Paul?
That's a tricky question, isn't it, really? I've been trying to weigh up in my mind which one I go for. As you both have chosen talking to animals, I'd love to talk to animals. I think I'd probably go for speaking languages. I think being a Brit, we're not sort of naturally as interested in learning other languages, are we? You don't really have to as much. So I'll probably go for being able to speak other people's languages and talk to them in their own tongue as well.
All right, thank you, very good. And Brian?
Well, I think I, like you, Craig, would like to talk to the animals. Being an avid fish keeper, it'd be interesting to get from the fish whether their tank is at the ideal conditions for their survival and that they're enjoying themselves in that swimming around in that nice hot water.
Or what's this guy feeding us now? We could do
Yes.
some decent food. Thanks, Brian. Thanks very much for that, guys, and welcome. And moving on to our main topic, it's fair to say that cybersecurity is a topic that often makes the headlines. It seems we can't go a day without seeing an incident of some sort. There was one this morning actually in the news podcast I listened to while walking about a satellite being hacked by the Russians a week before the Ukrainian war began, and it just seems to be that there isn't a day goes by, as I said. And given the sensitive nature of a lot of the information that organisations store on SAP, protecting these systems from cyber criminals is obviously critical to businesses. So in our discussion, we'd like to look into the different roles of SAP users and the potential cyber risks that they face. And Paul, perhaps you'd like to kick off by giving us an overview of some of the security challenges for SAP users.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Craig. And I think, in my role at SAP, I've been with SAP just over 6 years now. I cover all different industries, consumer products and retail, public sector, manufacturing, finance sector as well. Being to a lot of different organisations, and I think one of the key things that's always sort of talked about really when it comes to securing SAP environments is always around the patching. So that's probably the first area I'd sort of raise. And a lot of users ask questions about patching and trying to ensure they're as up to date as they can be. But there's places where you can go where you can identify, what the latest patches are, and being aware of where those SAP websites are, so that you can really have that knowledge at hand to ensure that you're as patched up as you possibly can be. I think that's always a helpful place to be. From a user perspective, we're obviously seeing, quite a ramping up at the moment. As you referenced earlier on, what's going on in Europe at the moment, there's an awful lot of pressure, I think, on UK businesses to defend themselves against potential threats which are occurring. And we're hearing, certainly over the past few months, instances where people who have left the organisation, for example, still have access to SAP systems, and obviously that can be a risk. So whether it be that person themselves acting maliciously, or that person's access details maybe being somehow gained from somebody. But also unnamed access as well. So where there's a user account being utilised to access systems with no name against it, that can also be an issue and has been raised up recently. So there's a whole host of different issues which customers are having to deal with. But certainly, this year has been probably the busiest that I can remember in terms of the conversations that we're having at the moment with clients around security, Craig.
Yeah, I can imagine, and I'm sure that's reflected in your business too, Andrew. And anything to add there on what you're seeing for SAP users?
In terms of complexity, it's largely visibility. Many customers have a sprawling SAP estate. It's hosted on premise, either a data center or private cloud. There's web elements, SAP Analytics Cloud. There's BTP, and just having visibility of where you exist, where your data is flowing, who has access to it, is a big challenge, and managing that large estate, as Paul mentioned, from a patching point of view, from a connection point of view, just keeping on top of all of that alone can be quite a challenge, especially if you don't have access to the server itself and you're relying on third parties to manage it.
Thanks. And Brian, as an SAP user and looking at it for organisations such as TATS Steel, what do you see?
Well, one of the biggest risks that I see in this really is to do with poorly developed code or poorly developed custom code, because we're heavily an organisation where we don't tend to use vanilla SAP. We tend to customize it for our own tweaks and everything there. And again, if that code is poorly developed, then you've got to and coupled with what Andrew said and what Paul have said, that you've got areas where people can access or gain access into your system. They may already have backdoors into some of the tables and the information is stored as well, because the code has been poorly developed. And of course, one thing, as we said earlier, it's an ever-evolving landscape. It doesn't sit still, and I think that's what gives us as businesses the biggest challenge is, keeping our cybersecurity posture up to date.
Mm-hmm. And you've all mentioned there, obviously, the size of the estate, lots of different users of SAP, and I suppose lots of different role types, and kind of to build on that, Andrew, I just wondered if you could give us an overview of some of the cyber threats different SAP users face, i.e., I think the main ones our listeners are probably interested in, i.e., HR specific threats, finance threats, vendor management ones, and what specific threats do they face?
Absolutely. So for most organisations, there is always a threat of phishing, so social engineering attacks against employees in those departments for a variety of means. For HR, it can be used to launch additional attacks on the company, confirming people's identity, confirming who they are. But there's also risks of fraud. For example, somebody trying to change the bank accounts or details. We've seen attacks where people have phoned in pretending to be somebody else with information they've gleaned through a social engineering attack to change where a pension is being paid, for example. Same within the finance area, business email compromise, where it's typical from a boss, don't contact me today, I'm busy, but can you please make this payment to this address? Don't ask questions. Very common, affects millions or thousands of companies around the world every year. If those business process controls are not in place, it's very easy for people to take that in good faith, and if they're not trained, make those payments, and ultimately the company loses money.
Thank you. And anything to add there, Paul?
Absolutely, Craig. So, I mean, absolutely agree with Andrew. I think phishing is probably the main source of challenges that we're having with customers. But I think brute force attacks is something that's been recognised. But I think more so it's the case now that what we're seeing is more around that. What's the value to the organisation that's attacking, rather than there being like that sort of historical intellectual stealing. It's more around financial gains which can be made. Attacks are really hidden away, probably more so now, until the crown jewels are being exposed and compromised, and so those organisations then have access to really be able to hold that organisation to ransom for the most amount of income. And I think we're seeing that again and again and again at the moment, and that's a cause for concern, certainly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Brian, just coming across you, obviously from an actual SAP customer and looking after the threats you face, do you see certain teams targeted more than others? For instance, will the finance team, which we've already touched on, face more threats than, say, the HR team because they have readily access to financial information?
Yes, Craig. We have, and it's not just finance as well. It's sometimes the procurement function as well. But we definitely see the finance people being targeted more along the scenario that sort of Paul pointed out. You make this payment today, or we've changed our bank account. Please update your details on there. And one of the biggest way to sort of counteract that really is with the awareness. But it's getting the balance right between doing the right awareness to make people aware of how to spot a phishing email, how to spot something that's out toward, but then not crying wolf, not giving them too much awareness training so that they just ignore it because, something else from IT telling us what we should be doing, and that on there. But finance is a big issue. And especially with some of the smaller sites where you're reliant on perhaps just one person in that process.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. And just going back to something that you mentioned earlier, Brian, around customizations. And obviously, you mentioned there pool developed code and customizations, etc. And Andrew, I don't know if you have any comments around some of the kind of impacts on cybersecurity around customizations.
Yeah, customizations are often a huge issue for many organizations. Any SAP system that's existed for more than a few months will have something customized in it, whether it's a new transaction, program, interfaces, or something else. Certainly for older SAP systems, they're legacy, they're untested, they were built with no security in mind. If new customizations are made with security, if new customizations are built with security in mind, typically we'll see hard-coded passwords, hard-coded credentials, opening up RFC ports, sending data to other systems which you don't know what is on the other end, and in general interfaces as well. You'll have hundreds of RFC connections, many of which aren't documented anymore. Documentation's been lost. You're not sure what the requirements are, what exactly it links to, what those IDs do. And so you end up with this mess of customization where transactions aren't following the authorization chain correctly. They aren't checking for users' access, being executed by IDs which have no documentation, feeding data into systems that you have no idea where they are, where they're hosted, or what they're doing with it. So it can be quite a hornet's nest once you start digging into some of the customizations you have and even trying to fix it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And Paul, anything to add there?
I think certainly there's evolution and things are changing all the time, and obviously becoming more and more of a challenge. I think I can't say too much about the cybersecurity defences that we have at SAP, but what I am seeing certainly at SAP is an increase in the cybersecurity focus. I think if we look at last year, for example, Christian Klein's kickoff. I think he mentioned cybersecurity 4 or 5 times in that So obviously there's that awareness last year that this is a big focus for SAP. This year we're seeing teams evolving within SAP himself. In the different regions where we're having cybersecurity specialists coming into SAP with specific knowledge to help support customers, and that's not just at say an application layer, but also at the sort of more platform layer, and across the board really. So I think we're really taking this seriously, and that's because of the fact that our customers are feeding back to us that the threats are evolving, the threats are increasing, and as I said earlier on, the nature of those threats now is more around the financial gain for the organisation that's attacking the SAP client. So we're needing to respond to that as quickly as we can as well to help the customers.
Thanks, and Brian, just coming back to you, if I may, because as I say, you're looking after security of a large organisation, and you already mentioned elements around training and phishing and mitigating cyber risks. Is there a silver bullet out there? What do you feel works, and how do we stop people clicking on what they're not supposed to be clicking on?
Oh, how I wish there was a silver bullet, Craig. Yeah, we would all, I think all of us would love to have a silver bullet that we could just say, here's the answer to all of that. No, it's getting, as I said earlier, it's getting the balance right between educating, training, the awareness, making people aware of what to do, what not to do, making them aware of how to identify the simplistic phishing attacks and various things like that. What you got to remember is that while threats are evolving, they are platform agnostic. It doesn't matter whether it's an SAP platform they attack. It's covers for anything. So it's the same sort of cybersecurity hygiene that you would put on any of the platforms that you're using. Really, you should be thinking about for all your applications, all the systems that you run within an organization.
Thanks, and Andrew, I'm sure there are systems and solutions out there that go some way to help and support organisations in this way. And what do you see there in supporting that? And I suppose what role does training play?
So, answer the tooling one first. Yes, there's an ever-growing selection of tools available, both from SAP and trusted partners. In terms of helping with these solutions, some will tackle specific threats or attacks. Others will try and integrate it more with the wider cyber attack, with the wider cyber defense tooling. As Brian said, many attackers are attacking the organization. SAP is just the biggest application in use there, so it will get attacked rather than targeting SAP. And so it's tying SAP into those wider cyber defense tools, so you can identify what you need to detect. You can detect when someone is attacking it. You can respond when someone is. You can shut off attacks. You can understand how they're attacking through the organization, and integration with things like your SIEM tooling for security and events and monitoring. So that's what a lot of the tooling is focusing on at the moment, understanding, is your SAP system vulnerable to attack? Your settings, your configuration, how you transfer data, your customization secure, and then enabling that detect and respond elements of protecting your organization. In addition, there has been a lot more focus on business process controls. So if the individual does fall for a business email compromise or a social engineering attack, as Brian said, training isn't always enough. Some people will click on these things. There will always be something more convincing. And having those business process controls in place, which can detect when a payment might not be legit, or have they gone through the full process before changing a bank account, are just as important in these types of spaces, just in case something does actually slip through the cracks. And so understanding and training individuals to know the full end-to-end process, what the approval should be, and as well alongside how to spot these social engineering attacks is all critical, especially for people with privileged access into the business or support.
Thank you. And Paul, anything to add from your side?
I think just feeding back how we do things at SAP really, I suppose, would be helpful. So we're very much focused on employee enablement around understanding what the impacts are of opening up an email with a malicious attachment, for example. But also, I think organisations need to also be aware of what the next step is. So how do organisations enable their employees to respond to something when they see it? And that's something that we're very much sort of keen on SAP is ensuring that with the amount of employees we have globally, that everybody's aware of what we should and shouldn't be doing. And so there's training that goes on within the organisation to enable us all to understand how we should be acting when we see something that doesn't look right, and being able to identify when something doesn't look right. So I think I'm sure all the customers that are listening to this today are already in that same place, but having a process which is also linked up so we can start to see patterns evolving. So where you may see where regions are under attack, or where specific offices or specific areas of the business, I think that can really help to speed up response as well.
Thank you.
Hi, we're the UK and Ireland SAP User Group. Did you know we're a fiercely independent not-for-profit? Did you know we're a vibrant community of over 6,500 SAP users? And did you know we help each other by sharing resources, championing education and influencing SAP's future development? Well, you do now. If you'd like to get the most from your SAP investments and be in the know, visit our website sapusers.org/pod. We hope you enjoy the rest of the podcast.
Just looking to kind of the future as well. So lots of customers driving towards the move from ECC to S4HANA. And, what should they be thinking about in terms of cybersecurity in that move? Paul?
So yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I'm sure that a lot of our listeners will have heard of the SAP Trust Center, but that's a great resource, customer-facing resource, where you can go to identify really a lot of information around security, whether that be organisations themselves, just getting some sort of thought leadership really. So how to secure the business moving forwards. Looking at the cloud services they're looking to adopt, looking at SAP Security, how to protect systems, looking at the privacy and the privacy policies SAP have in place already, which regulations SAP are compliant with. So the ISO regulations, so on, and other regulations which are related to the security space. We also then start thinking about the data centers that you're going to be utilising as part of that move. So a lot of people are moving from on-premise to S4HANA in a hosted environment. So what is available from a data center perspective, both from third parties and also from SAP, and how do you protect the data when it's in the data center themselves? So there's a whole load of information which organisations and customers can gain access to from the Trust Center, and if we can share that link at some point, that'd be great. But that really is a single point of knowledge. Really, it also gives you the ability to see the status of all the cloud applications from SAP, and to be able to actually identify and log when you see an issue, for example, as well. So I suppose there's a whole host of different aspects to consider as part of that move from ECC to S4HANA. Not just where the data is going to be residing, but also what wraparounds you can put around that data, to really help protect it.
Okay, thank you. And Andrew, just what role can SAP partners play to help customers mitigate risk?
There's a couple of ways. So partners which would typically be involved with development or implementing the system, it's not treating security like a non-functional requirement. Security by design is a thing, has been a thing for many years, and it's taking that into account. So when developing new programs, it is building them correctly. Authorization checks, restricted, what data they can access. Same with any HANA views, restrict only appropriate data is surfaced and shared. making sure that interfaces are protected sufficiently from end to end. You're not using old file stores to store HR data as it's being shunted around between SAP systems, unencrypted sitting on the network. Just supporting from that aspect from a development side. It's supporting it from an infrastructure side. So as Paul mentioned, S4 is a good chance to evaluate, just to almost start from scratch, really. It's understanding SAP in its entirety, using some of those resources. Partners should hopefully be following the guidelines in the SAP security baseline in the security operations map to give that complete picture of SAP, not just the application, not just the HANA database, but the infrastructure, the interfaces, how individuals connect to it as well. And partners as well externally outside who are developing tools, it's the same principle. We're not 20 years ago now. Organizations should be building secure applications from the start with appropriate data privacy policies, security policies to make sure that when you are sharing data into them or they're interfacing with SAP, they are compliant. You can prove it, you can show it, and hopefully in a transparent way as possible, demonstrate that rather than just a giant SOC 2 report, which is generic and given to most customers in most cases. So just being as transparent as possible to say, this is how we protect your data, this is what we do, and then being honest if something goes wrong.
Thank you. And just moving on a little, reflecting on the pandemic and what that's brought us, which obviously is a lot of remote working. Brian, from your perspective in TATS Steel, what considerations do organisations have to think about to deal with remote working on top of everything else?
It's a very good question. Remote working, one of the key aspects that we consider there is how the connection to our SAP systems is made. I'll give you an example with us in TATS Steel. We have our own VPN, so nobody can access our SAP system unless they come via the corporate VPN. So if they try, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't give them. They don't get the interface to sign into SAP. So for us, that was one of the key things, was to make sure that people can work from home, but they've still got to use their own works at the laptop if they are doing a line job. If they're just writing emails and things like that, then we allow them to use Office and some of the Office tools there. But for us, it's a key. The key for us was VPNs, using a virtual private network to connect into the SAP system.
Paul, what are you seeing anything from your customers outside of those things Brian mentioned?
Well, I think one of the areas that I deal with is single sign-on. And obviously SAP's got a number of capabilities around enabling organisations to embed single sign-on within their organisation. And that's been a very busy area for us over the past couple of years, especially with organisations having employees working remotely, their password resets and removing the requirement for IT teams to spend so much time resetting passwords and removing that burden has really been helpful, I think. But also just over the access governance piece as well. So, obviously there's not been quite, I think organisations have been quite open that, with everybody working remotely, there's been more chances of employees, having to cover for somebody else. So, people being off work for obvious reasons, and people having to cover having a different level of access for that period of time and then not being revoked once the other person's come back to work, has potentially introduced further risks around segregation duties especially. So we've seen the sort of the access governance piece as well being ramped up. And I think also what's driving that is potentially UKISUG as well being on the radar for organisations. So not just the pressures around the global pandemic, but also with UKISUG potentially on the horizon. That's also been driving conversations. But I think if I can point our users to, or our listeners to one of the SAP documents, if they Google for the Global Security Strategy, Securing the Intelligent Enterprise, I think that'd be a great resource for them. And that's been written with it's been written during the pandemic to help organisations, just from a strategic point of view, understand the different areas they could be focusing on. So that could be a great resource.
Okay, excellent. Well, what we'll do, we'll get that link off you, and we'll upload that with the show notes so people can access that, Paul. Excellent. And Andrew, anything to add there?
Yeah, I'd just like to add, the pandemic has shown, or research has shown, that during the pandemic and that massive shift to remote working for many organisations, a lot of individuals are more susceptible to social engineering attacks, unfortunately. It's a lot easier to spot if it is your boss emailing you, if you can physically see them. But remote, you're often working alone. It's easy to click on these things, harder to bounce ideas off people. So, tools like process control, business integrity screening become ever more important to try and spot when things aren't being executed as expected or unexpected events occur. Also from security teams as well, a lot we've seen, it's looking at areas you hadn't normally considered when everyone's in the office. So who can print, items which, pay slips, if customers are still using custom payslip printers, it's where do those now print to? Can you print sensitive data at home? How easy is it for an employee to print lots of confidential data off, accidentally leave it lying around the house and have the kids use it as colouring in paper? We've seen that with various organisations and customers. You have to think end to end, both in the system and what they do with that data once they've left, because people don't lock their screens as much at home. Kids use it for laptops. Children use it to play games or watch videos. It opens up a fair number of new security risks for organisations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very interesting. Very interesting point there. And so when we look about lots of these things, there's a lot of a human element. That probably is the weakest link of the chain, as we know. But then when we look at SAP itself, Paul, how does SAP go about updating the cyber defences baked into the products and patching potential issues?
I think obviously, patching is something that we're doing all the time, 24/7, or at least developing those patches. And that's based upon customer feedback, but also from what SAP are actually seeing themselves. But I think also something that maybe not fully aware to clients is just how much we focus on developing our applications with security in mind now. So that's very much part of everything that we're doing at the moment has that security element to it. So all the new applications that SAP are developing, or when we acquire a third party and we do develop their application, we have a whole process that the software developers are actually focusing on, which is embedding security within the actual applications themselves. So hopefully moving forwards, obviously the objective is to reduce the number of patching that we require, but also to ensure that our applications are as secure as they can be, at the box.
Excellent. And anything to add there, Brian, on the ensuring that the patches are applied, etc.?
One of the things that I would say is that, it's knowing what's in the patch when you get it, because especially if you're using older versions of some of the systems, then you could cause more harm than what you would solve by just blindly implementing a patch. So it's having the teams and the expertise to have a look and see what is in the patch, what is it actually fixing, and seeing whether that actually fits in with your estate. And and you can then take that patch and apply it straight off. I think that's one of the key things, is identifying what exactly is in that patch, so that you are patching the holes that you intend to, and not opening anything else up with some of the older systems that you have.
Mm-hmm. It's also blocking off as well, though, isn't it? So many of these patches will be turning off parameters, stopping man-in-the-middle attacks or whatever else, tweaking dozens of settings, which most organizations have never looked at. They went live with it out of the box, never touched them. And so suddenly shutting off the way applications can talk to SAP or enforcing authorization checks can have massive consequences, which you might not detect for a while, especially if most organizations will follow their process that apply patches to development, promote them through to production after testing. But many organizations won't have a full integration or quality assurance system which matches production. With all the hundreds of interfaces and hundreds of users running thousands of transactions a minute, it can be very challenging for organizations to apply and test these and hope that nothing goes wrong.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And just on that point, and looking at one of the elements there, what businesses should be doing, is there anything else you'd like to add in terms of what businesses should be doing? Paul?
I think from what we're seeing, with the meetings that I'm having with organisations, is just being aware of what SAP can do to assist. I think historically, many organisations are aware that from a user perspective, SAP can certainly help with them. Our access governance solutions, identity and access management is obviously something that organisations are aware of, but not all organisations are aware of the fact that SAP have a number of capabilities, both internally and also with our partners, to help them with the cybersecurity, whether that be, as I say, the user security, data security, or system security. And certainly, I think we were at one of the UKISUG special interest groups recently, where I was talking about one of the applications around protecting your data in a hyperscaler, for example. And the encryption key management service that we have on top of that. So there wasn't awareness within that forum that SAP had those capabilities. So I think where organisations are identifying challenges, I think they're obviously SAP clients, reach out to your SAP contacts, whether that be the business architects team or the account executive, or even myself and my team at the Domain Advisory, because we can share with you how we can potentially assist through technology and delivering automation, but also giving that real-time awareness of where threats are occurring within the organisation itself.
Thank you. Andrew, anything to add there?
For me, it's understanding your risk. What risks are you actually trying to mitigate or prevent? What are the key business processes that you're worried about as an organisation? So not just SAP, but what data you're trying to protect? What are the bigger impacts to you? Have those conversations with the business. If you're in the SAP Security team, talk to the CISO. If you're in the CISO, talk to the cybersecurity team. Understand what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to protect. There was a time when SAP attacks were more hypothetical. We knew for most organizations, it is a crown jewel, one of the largest applications, if not the largest. But attacks weren't really proven. But now SAP is being attacked for being SAP. There are exploits being published, available on GitHub. You can, moments after they're being announced, you can execute them yourself on your own systems. So what are your actual risks you're trying to protect in the company, and what are those controls? Are they training, additional tooling such as process control, revising your business processes? There's a number of different ways you can go, but if you don't understand what risk you're trying to prevent, or what risk you're trying to prevent materialize, then you'll end up spinning around, spending a lot of money, not achieving much.
Thank you. And, thank you all very much. We've touched on lots of different areas and lots of different things businesses can be looking at to, if you like, further secure their business from cyber threats. And as we come to a close, I just thought, we'd end up with some further practical advice for our listeners. So, what I'd like to ask you, if I may, is what are your top 3 cybersecurity tips? And okay, if I can start with you, please, Brian.
My top 3, Craig, would be awareness and education, practice good security hygiene, and consider your SAP configuration against security best practice.
Okay, and I assume security hygiene isn't sanitising before you use a keyboard.
That as well.
Thanks. Andrew?
Mine are similar. Communication, which I include training under, making sure the responsible people, and that includes CISO, security teams, the business, know what the issues are, how to address them, what to look out for. It would be making sure the correct controls are applied, which is configuration, making sure the unauthorized systems aren't being changed, and customization is secure. And testing it, actual testing, not more red teaming or using the right tools for the job. Actually understand if you're secure. If someone attacks or someone tries to make a risk materialize, can they actually do it?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And finally, final words over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Craig. So I think from my point of view, I think something that has been mentioned earlier on in this session was really around employee evangelism. I think that's really critical for organisations to just keep everybody aware, and that's got to be a repetitive thing. It's not a once a year update because people come and go, people move around the business, and just ensuring that everybody's aware within the organisation of what their part to play is in securing the organisation. I think that's critical. Also, having open dialogue with SAP and our partners. There's a whole host of resources available. Being aware of what those resources are, whether they be white papers, blogs, support sites, engagement with SAP security specialists, both our partners and SAP. So open dialogue with SAP I'd certainly recommend. Keeping up to date with what's current, but also then from a cost saving perspective, is to consider automation. So where can automation start to remove the burden on your manpower? Where can bots, where can applications, where can artificial intelligence start to take a lead really in terms of identifying where potential threats are occurring within the business? So I think that's going to be a big issue moving forward. Just the amount of time that people are taking to identify where these threats are occurring and then acting upon those. And what we're seeing is oftentimes the human factor is where those potential controls break down. So having a system in place that delivers automated awareness, automated detection, and responding automatically as well to red flag or to at least flag up where there's a potential issue occurring, gives organisations the ability to not to save costs, but also to save costs when it comes to the actual potential impact to their business of any potential attack.
Okay. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you all for your time and for your insights today. Really, really enjoyed the conversation. And to our listeners, we hope you have enjoyed the conversation and found it valuable. So be sure to hit that little plus sign at the top of your screen to subscribe so the next episode drops straight into your favourite podcast app. And until the next time, stay safe, stay well, and keep washing your hands.